Wave at the camera. Good afternoon, my name is D.Reddish, and today I'm going to give you a speech on the use of force. In the line of duty, law enforcement officers are expected to protect their citizens from criminal activity in a moment's notice. That is where the use of force comes in. The use of force is at times necessary, but we must know what type, when, and how it needs to be used in a particular moment. I have been in law enforcement for 10 years and understand what use of force is. I have used force on multiple occasions to effect an arrest and stop a threat. First, I will discuss what the use of force is and how the force is applied to specific situations. Second, I will discuss when deadly force can be used and what is reasonable force. Third, I will discuss some studies associated with using the taser as a less than lethal force option. What is force? It is utilizing presence, verbal commands, control mechanisms, or weapons to stop a threat or criminal activity. While this is a generic definition, there are steps an officer can use to define how to stop a threat. That is through the use of force continuum, a set of steps that are used in law enforcement. They don't need to be used in a specific order, but it's a guideline for officers to go by to determine what is appropriate when it comes to using force. The first step of the use of force continuum is officer presence. Their uniform and stature are used to deter crime, use of force continuum. In this case, no use of force is necessary, only their presence is what's needed to use the force. Secondly, you have verbalization. This is a non-physical type of force where an officer uses verbal techniques to defuse a situation, use of force continuum. Third is empty hand controls. This is the first hands-on type of force. This is when an officer goes hands-on with a subject and can use a series of physical techniques to stop a situation. They are broken into two categories of soft or hard techniques. Soft techniques are when an officer uses grabs, holds, and joint locks to restrain an individual, use of force continuum. Hard techniques is when an officer uses punches and kicks to restrain an individual, use of force continuum. The fourth step in the use of force continuum, and often most effective, is less than lethal or non-lethal force. This is where we can see weapons. This is where we can see weapons introduced. Some of these are batons, chemical sprays, or tasers. Officers use these weapons because they are less likely to cause death or serious harm when stopping a threat. The final force level and last resort, and only when necessary, is deadly force. This is when the officer must use their service weapon to stop a threat. This type of force is usually reserved when all other means have failed and there's no other option. Even though use of force continuum is standard across all departments, training on all of these scenarios should continue to increase to stop unnecessary force from being used. Baker et al. Stated in 2015, approximately 30,000 of 996, stated in 2015, approximately 30% of 996,000 encounters were deemed necessary, and 48% were deemed excessive. This is why training should continue to be a factor in how force is used. When an officer is going to use force, they must understand when and how they can use that force. The threat has to match the type of force used. For example, deadly force can only be used when a suspect has a firearm and is showing signs of using force on an officer or another person. Officers cannot use any type of force to stop a threat. For instance, chokeholds are now outlawed in law enforcement and cannot be used due to unnecessary deaths. That's why the use of force continuum exists. That way officers know what force they can use, when they can use it, and how they can use it. Graham versus Connor is a court case that discusses when an officer can use deadly force. Hassan. In 1989, it was decided through this case that an officer can only use the reasonable amount of force necessary. Hassan. This also means when using deadly force, it must be reasonable to match or go a step ahead of the criminal activity. Reasonableness is broken down into two questions. Was it necessary to use force at all? Was the force that was used in proportion to the threat? Hassan. A taser or conducted energy device is a less than lethal force option that officers can use to stop a threat. It is an energy weapon that utilizes a projectile with prongs and delivers an electric shock. There was a study conducted on 3 agencies, over 24,000 use of force incidents when a taser was used. When physical force was used, injury increased. When a taser was used, likelihood of injury to a suspect dropped between 65 and 70%. And officer injury was unaffected. Bowman. The use of force continuum is the outline of how force is to be used. Officers must know what method is called for in the event of a threat. These decisions are made within seconds in stressful situations. Tasers are utilized as a force option because studies show their effectiveness while also decreasing likelihood of injury to both parties. Thank you.